Get her off the stage. She's black and she's blind. She's about to ruin the Steinway piano. What would you do if you were humiliated in front of a crowd just because you're different? Today, on Mystic Life Stories for American Audience, we're sharing a true story that left the whole world speechless. A blind black girl mocked on stage by a famous artist himself. But just minutes later, she made the entire audience stand up, and the man who insulted her bowed his head in silence. This wasn't just a piece of music. It was a voice of resilience and justice from the most unexpected place. What would you do if you were humiliated in front of a crowd just because you're different? Today, on Mystic Life Stories for American Audience, we're sharing a true story that left the whole world speechless. A blind black girl mocked on stage by a famous artist himself. But just minutes later, she had the whole audience on their feet, and the person who insulted her had to bow his head in silence. This was more than just a piece of music. It was the voice of resilience and justice from where no one expected it. Crystal clear light, cut down like a cold blade over the grand stage of Boston's Harmonic Theater, where sonatas usually echo in absolute reverence. Tonight, hundreds of distinguished guests wore tuxedos and evening gowns. The top patrons of the classical music world had gathered to rehearse for the International Symphony Night. Amid that glamorous setting, a moment was about to shatter the perfect glass ceiling they believed was unbreakable. A young girl stepped out from behind the curtain, slender in frame. Her dark brown skin stood out against a simple black dress without any patterns. In her hand was a white cane, a symbol of blindness, but also the scepter of those who have learned to see with their souls. This girl was Elise Harper, 10 years old, black, blind since birth, unknown, without an agent, and unfamiliar to the audience. Elise moved slowly, her steps both hesitant and fearless. Her right hand lifted off the cane's handle, hovering just a few inches above the glossy black surface of the Steinway & Sons D-274 piano center stage. Then a voice rang out, shattering the silence like a hammer breaking glass. "Get her off the stage. She'll ruin the piano." That voice wasn't from a drunken audience member or a stranger. It came from Nathaniel Royce, the legendary white pianist known as the cold heart of American classical music. He wore a custom black suit, his silver hair reflecting the stage lights like a fake halo. His eyes never left the girl, but his gaze was as cold as steel, a look that had crushed hundreds of young artists with just a raised eyebrow. "She's blind. Oh my God, who lets an unknown black blind kid touch my $150,000 Steinway? This isn't a charity event." Light chuckles came from backstage, a few soft coughs from the audience. Some turned away, embarrassed for him, but there were also silent, nod-quiet approval. No one stood up. No one spoke out. The entire hall fell silent before the cruelty spoken, as if it were an undeniable truth. But Elise didn't back down. She stood tall, lifting her head toward the voice. Even though her cloudy white eyes saw no one, her white cane was still in her hand, but she didn't use it to retreat. Instead, she took another step forward, right into the eye of the storm. She turned slightly toward the empty audience seats, as if sensing every gaze upon her. Then, without a word, she sat down at the piano bench. Nathaniel Derek Vaugh almost shouted from the wings, "Don't let her play. She's going to make a fool of herself in front of everyone." But Elise didn't listen. She didn't have to. Her small hands, once practicing in the dark, trembling over old piano keys in the orphanage, now gently reached for the first key. Her fingers didn't strike the keys out of anger or revenge. They touched the keys like they were touching a memory soft, tender but with purpose. And then, the first note rang out, not loud, not flashy, but it cut through the prejudice in the air like the first light breaking through darkness. And the world, which had just been frowning and turning away, waiting for failure, suddenly held its breath, because in that moment, something unnameable had begun. The very first sound beneath Elise's fingertips was the result of a journey that no one in that room had ever witnessed. A silent journey, full of darkness and heavy with its own weight. 2 years ago, on a bleak winter afternoon in Hartford, Connecticut, a social services van pulled up outside Eastbrook Conservatory, a place that only accepted students from elite, prestigious musical families. In the biting cold, Elise, a 10-year-old black girl who had been blind since birth and orphaned by age 3, stepped down from the van, carrying a faded suitcase, a cracked braille reader, and a broken white cane taped back together. No one was there to welcome her. On paper, she wasn't an official student. She was admitted through a humanitarian pilot program called Silent Observer, a phrase that sounded charitable but was really a fancy way to legitimize, excluding her from all classes, performances, and access to instruments. In an environment where students were children of U.S. ambassadors, grandchildren of Pulitzer Prize-winning composers, and heirs to top executives at New York's biggest record labels, a blind girl from the welfare system was nothing more than a troublesome shadow wandering the marble hallways. From day one, Elise learned to shrink back. She didn't speak. She didn't walk fast. She didn't knock on classroom doors. Instead, she curled up in the hallway outside room 2B, where Professor Samuel Whitaker taught harmony analysis. She couldn't see him, but she memorized every echoing footstep on the wooden floor, could tell when he tapped the board with his left hand instead of his right, and heard every note of students' exercises through the slightly open door as they played the grand piano inside. She traced music with her hands on her lap. She learned rhythm by counting other people's footsteps as they left the room. And when she returned to her cramped dorm room for unofficial students, she ran her fingers along the walls, recalling the day's sounds. But the most important thing wasn't Elise's isolation. It was the silent complicity of those around her. The students never shouted at her, but they never greeted her either. They avoided eye contact, kept their distance, and always kept classroom doors tightly shut. Once, Elise accidentally walked into the practice room one evening. A white student named Ethan Carter, son of a state senator, mocked and ridiculed her in front of his friends. I wonder when the school started taking in pets. The whole room laughed. She didn't respond. She just stood there, her hand on the piano, then quietly turned away. But the pain from that comment cut deeper than any physical blow she had ever endured. Even the dorm manager, Miles Jackson, often hinted, "Elise, this is a prestigious school. You shouldn't make people uncomfortable." Uncomfortable, a word both gentle and cruel. It didn't accuse, it didn't shout, but it cut deep like a mocking knife. Elise began to retreat even more. But she didn't give up. Instead of fighting back, she listened even more carefully. She noticed that the wooden floor in the third-floor practice room dipped slightly at measure 44, and the second floor had better resonance for the lower notes. She began playing music in her mind. No piano, no sheet music, no teacher. Then one night after Professor Samuel Whitaker's lecture, when the whole class had left, he went outside and saw Elise still sitting there, her hand hovering in the air, as if silently playing a concerto in the dark hallway. He stood still. He didn't say a word. He didn't interrupt because at that moment, he realized this girl didn't need light to see the music. That night, heavy rain fell like a curtain, dimming all the lights around Harper Conservatory's campus. A soft wind howled through the stone hallways. where the heavy wooden doors had long been firmly shut. Outside, the Academy's top students gathered in the Grand Hall, excitedly discussing scholarships, performances at Carnegie Hall, and recording opportunities for the upcoming fall season. Everything was reserved for the chosen few. But upstairs, in a quiet corner of the hallway, a faint light spilled out from classroom 2B, casting a glow on Professor Samuel Whitaker's silent face. Though retired, he was still invited back once a week to teach an advanced harmony analysis class, not for the fame, but for his love of the craft and music he had always revered like a faith. When the door closed behind the last student, he saw her, Elise, sitting cross-legged back against the wall, her hand raised as if playing an invisible piece. She didn't know anyone was watching. She just counted beats on her fingers, moving each chord by the memory of the sound, things she'd never seen with her own eyes, but understood better than anyone who'd ever sat in that classroom. Samuel didn't interrupt. He moved slowly until he stood in front of her, then spoke in a voice as gentle as the deep warmth of a cello. "Did you hear my lecture?" Elise startled slightly. Her white cane tilted to the side reflexively, but she didn't pull it back. She nodded. He was just trying to picture the fugue. Her answer wasn't an excuse or a plea. It was simply a sincere confession, so genuine that Samuel felt his chest tighten. He sat down on the step right next to her. They both fell silent, listening to the rain tapping against the window. Then he tilted his head toward her, fragile blind girl with dreamy but determined eyes, and said something simple. "Don't apologize. Just play it right." That was the first invitation Elise had ever received from anyone at the conservatory. And from that rainy night on, an unspoken, unofficial bond stronger than any artistic contract began to form. The lessons that followed took place in the dark. No textbooks, no Steinway piano, no orchestra backing. Just an old upright piano in a basement storage room, where the musty scent of old sheet music lingered like traces of time. And just two people. A girl who had never been officially recognized as a student, and a professor once hailed as a genius. Samuel didn't teach with terms. He told stories about how a fugue was like a chase of the soul, and how a major chord could feel as heavy as stone when the context before it was a farewell. He tapped rhythms on Elise's knee. He showed her how to place her hand so her fingertips could feel the vibration of the strings through the wood. He taught her how to listen to emotion, not just notes. D-sharp isn't always sad. It's just the shadow cast when the light fades. And Elise, she soaked it all up like dry earth soaking up rain. No need to repeat. Never had to play the same thing twice. But Samuel didn't just teach, he observed. What shocked him most wasn't her extraordinary memory or her frighteningly fast learning speed. It was something rare even among professionals. Elise doesn't play to impress. She plays to survive. For her, music isn't the goal. It's the one language the world can't take away from her. When spring arrives, the leaves curl and reach out from the old studio window. That's also when Samuel Whitaker did something he hadn't done in over 40 years teaching at Eastbrook. He submitted a recommendation for someone who didn't even have a student ID. In his letter for the Young Virtuoso Showcase audition, he didn't mention the word blind. He didn't mention that she's black. He didn't write about struggles or overcoming odds. He wrote only about Elise Harper, age 10. Music is her first language. Everyone else on the committee is still learning it as a second language. But Samuel forgot one thing. Eastbrook doesn't read music. Eastbrook reviews the files. And one file with no family photos, no parents' names, no financial contributions, no letter headings, a file without any tone before it's even spoken. Eastbrook has an unspoken rule that every student understands. Talent is necessary, but lineage is your passport. And while kids with last names like Whitman, Devereux, or Langford learn music theory from colorful sheets on tissue paper, Elise has no famous name, no scores, no patron. She learned through the wind blowing through the window, the vibration of wood when someone played off beat, and anonymous rehearsals in a dark room in the old basement. It was there that Samuel Whitaker began lessons that would never be included in any curriculum. And it was also where he started relearning himself through how Elise experienced the world. Samuel didn't hand her printed music, no tapping of a metronome, no invitation to practice a section. Instead, he gently touched her wrist, then tapped a rhythm on her finger as if playing an invisible drum. Each beat was a message, each note a soft tap, silence, long, short, then broken. He tapped her wrist to teach her how to recognize sync. He taught her to feel variations not by counting, but by sensing the air in her lungs when a note lands right on time but in the wrong place. D isn't always just D, he said. Sometimes it's like a waterfall. Other times it's a silent sob inside the chest. Elise didn't ask a single question. She never needed to repeat anything. She took it all in through her skin, through her muscles, through the beat of her pulse. And what made Samuel shiver wasn't that she played it right, it was that she played it true. One night, Samuel described a Bach fugue as a man chasing his own shadow through a maze of time. Elise listened, then suddenly played it back. Not the right notes, not the right tempo, but he realized she wasn't playing the score. She was playing the story. He stood still, and for the first time in years, Samuel felt ashamed that he once taught that ear training could be taught through formulas. Yet, as Elise improved day by day, the quiet resistance around her started to grow. In the faculty room, a few began whispering, "I heard McCain is giving that girl private lessons. That's irresponsible. She's not even an official student. If she shows up too soon, it'll damage the department's reputation." Then Benjamin Cole, head of the piano department, once called the spiritual air of Royce, invited Samuel into his office and made it clear, "I know you care about your project, but if you cross the line, there will be consequences. Eastbrook isn't a place to experiment with pity. Pit your word heavy as a slappet." Samuel said nothing. He just gave a slight smile and walked away. But Elise had no idea about those meetings. She just kept listening. By then, Elise no longer played the way Samuel told her to. She started playing what Samuel didn't dare admit: the regret, the loneliness of someone who reached the peak of glory, only to realize that everything he taught in life was never truly heard. In one lesson, Elise played a short improvised piece. No one told her to do it. She just felt she had to. She started with a hanging chord, then broke it with a low note, cracked like footsteps on thin ice. Samuel stood still, tears falling without him even realizing it, because he understood she wasn't just learning from him, she was healing him. And that's why, despite being blocked, threatened, and isolated, Samuel quietly sent Elise's application to the most prestigious audition of the year. A file with no parent name, no guardian, no photo, just an attached audiophilia short. Emotional improvisation Elise played. He didn't know this would bring Elise closer to the spotlight, but it would also put her right in the middle of discrimination. When Samuel Whitaker submitted Elise's audition, he didn't do what everyone else in Eastbrook would have done. He didn't attach recommendation letters from famous conductors. He didn't send a photo of Elise wearing a pretty dress standing next to a shiny piano. No greetings, no inspiring story. He simply wrote briefly in the description, "Elise Harper, 15 years old. She doesn't read sheet music because she hears it before anyone writes it down. The attached audio file was a recording of an improvisation Elise played in the basement on a rainy afternoon. A nameless piece, no set rhythm, no standard melody. But Samuel was sure of one thing. It was authentic. And authenticity in this glamorous music world was something that was slowly being forgotten. A few weeks later, the school announced Elise was allowed to audition. Not in the main hall, not with a full panel of judges, not during peak hours with cameras rolling, but at 7:45 in the morning in a small practice room downstairs, with an old upright piano, with a crooked left pedal, and only one anonymous judge present. An approval disguised as permission, but really a subtle rejection. That morning, Elise woke up at 5 a.m. She didn't eat breakfast. She didn't say a word. She just sat silently in the room, her hand gliding over the edge of the old suitcase, like she was tracing back the past. Samuel quietly walked beside her. When they reached the door, he took her cold hand and whispered, "This isn't about them choosing you. It's about you deciding whether you need them or not." The door opened. The room was empty. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The judge, a middle-aged man in a gray shirt and thin glasses, nodded as if he just wanted to get it over with. No name tag, no introduction, just the scratchy piano sound with a slight crackle in the mid-range. Elise didn't ask. She didn't complain. She stepped forward, set the white cane aside, and sat down. Her hands rested on the keys like she was touching an old scar. She took a deep breath and began Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It's a piece that demands both technical skill and emotional depth. For others, it was just a test. For Elise, it was a vivid memory. Nights she spent alone listening to faint recordings on an old radio, recalling every note from memory. She's right-handed. Her left hand was telling a story. Her somber eyes were closed. Not because she was blind, but as if she was listening to the voice inside the music rather than the audience. When the last note echoed, the room fell silent like a tomb. No applause, no thank yous. The judge just nodded lightly, jotted down a few lines on his paper, then stood up and left. The door slammed shut coldly. Elise sat there a few more seconds, not waiting for anyone, but because she needed to listen to herself one last time. Did I say anything? She didn't know that down the hall, in the dark corner near the tech room, Mr. Richard, the conservatory janitor, had accidentally witnessed the entire audition. He didn't know much about classical music, but he'd cleaned the floor where Rachmaninoff once performed, changed the lights when Duke Ellington visited, and he knew this little girl played music like no one who'd ever been here before. Without thinking, he pulled an old phone from his coat pocket, opened the camera, and quietly recorded the last 3 minutes of her performance. No edits, no filters, no commentary, just a simple title. The Blind Black Girl auditions in the side room, but it brought Rachmaninoff to life. Then he uploaded it to an old musicians forum he'd been part of in the 2000s, just so no one would forget this moment. The next day, Elise got a notice from the selection committee. "We appreciate your effort. Unfortunately, you are not on this year's official performance list." No explanation, no comments, no second chance. But what they didn't realize was that by silencing Elise, they just turned up the volume for the whole world to hear. The rejection notice from Eastbrook Conservatory landed in Samuel Whitaker's inbox as a short 2-sentence email. No, thank you. No explanation, no mention of how Elise played. Samuel printed the letter, folded it in half, and put it in a drawer. He didn't tell Elise. She didn't ask. They both understood. Sometimes silence is just how the world responds to things it doesn't want to admit. But that silence didn't last long. 3 days after the rejected audition, a video quietly uploaded to YouTube by Richard, the gatekeeper with salt and pepper hair who'd been scolded by students for dropping the mop bucket. The video title was simple: no clickbait. The blind black girl rejected by the conservatory plays a Rachmaninoff piece from memory. At first, just a few dozen views, mostly from accounts following old classical music forums. A few scattered comments. The sound was a bit muffled, but she played confidently. Who posted this video? And who is she? An Argentine pianist named Marcos Viala, famous for playing with one hand after a car accident, shared the clip on his personal page with the caption, "I cried, and I haven't cried over music in 10 years. Soon after, a music blogger from Berlin reposted it on Twitter with the message, "If Eastbrook can't see anything in this girl, then the problem isn't her eyes, it's theirs." The spread started like an underground wave. No noise, no PR, no big names attached. But with every share, viewers stayed longer, listened closer, and began to do what even Eastbrook never did. They listened, really listened. A deaf Japanese artist named Yuki Sakamoto, who only feels music through vibrations from a speaker pressed against his jawbone, shared the song with a caption in Japanese meaning, "She doesn't need to see the keys to reach me. I don't need to hear every note clearly to feel her crying through her hands." Within 72 hours, the clip hit 3 million views. No algorithm, no bait, just one thing raw emotion that can't be taught, guided, or copied. In the first week, music websites started asking, "Who is Elise Harper? Which music school turned this girl down? Why would such talent be left down in the basement?" Eastbrook, once just a name in the artist honors section, was now making headlines with words like discrimination, denial of black talent, and entrenched privilege at an emergency board meeting. Benjamin Cole, head of the piano department, slammed his hand on the table in anger. "This is just an online fad. A black kid playing by instinct, without technique, without real harmony. The media is blowing this out of proportion." But the school's communications director, Sophie Travers, pale-faced, only showed one tweet on the screen from the International Music Academy. "We've watched the video and want Elise Bell to open this year's World Harmony Night." Silence followed. It lingered there, colder than anything Elise had ever faced in the halls of the music school. Langford growled, "If she's invited, who's going to perform after her?" No one answered because everyone understood that there would be no one after her if she really found her voice. And in a small room at the nursing home Samuel McCain rented outside Boston, he sat quietly in front of his old laptop, staring at the announcement. Elise Harper was invited to perform at the World Harmony Music Gala, kicking off the global broadcast. He closed his eyes, didn't cry, just whispered. Finally, the voice that was never invited doesn't need an invitation anymore. That morning, before the sunlight even crept through the window, Elise sat at an old wooden table in the small apartment she rented with Professor Samuel Whitaker in the Boston suburbs. Her fingers gently brushed over a thick envelope sent by express mail from New York. The embossed words on the top of the envelope were clear: "Invitation to perform at the International Gala of Human Harmony." She didn't open the letter. She didn't need to. The moment her fingers touched the first embossed words, her heart already knew. This time, the world was inviting her. The International Gala of Human Harmony is an annual global event, a music gala held at the magnificent Crescendo Hall in New York, where stars like Lang Lang, Alicia Keys, and Yo-Yo Ma have performed. This year, the event would be broadcast to over 60 countries under the theme "Breaking Barriers Through Sound." Elisabel's name was set as the opening act, and the artist scheduled to perform right after her was none other than Nathaniel Royce, a famous pianist, a classical icon, who had once stood in front of hundreds of fans, pointed at her, and said she didn't deserve to touch a Steinway piano. When Derek Vaughan received the official lineup, he nearly threw the paper down on the table. A nameless, blind black kid. This is a gala art performance, not some emotional opera-style show. He didn't say it angrily. On the contrary, his voice was calm to the point of coldness, the kind of tone only people who believe their fame is law, and they are the ones defining value, can use. Royce's personal advisor, a woman named Judith Carr, spoke softly. It was a request from the organizers. They said her video had surpassed 30 million views, and they wanted an icon. Derek Vaughan squinted. Did they want an icon, or did they want moral prestige to sell tickets? The coordination meeting at the theater was tense, like a string pulled too tight. When Derek Vaughan arrived right on time, wearing a jacket, sunglasses, and carrying an air of authority, he went straight to Gerard Monroe, the artistic director of the gala, a refined Frenchman who had managed hundreds of major and minor music events and arranged concerts for 3 U.S. presidents. Derek Vaughan didn't say much. He just stood in front of Monroe and dropped his words like lead. "I demand a change in the order. I will not perform after her." Gerard looked him straight in the eye, without blinking, without smiling, without lowering his voice. "You can back down, Royce, but she can't." In that moment, something not shame, but fear leaked from Nathaniel Royce's eyes. Fear of what? Fear that everything he once owned, his reputation, power, monopoly, was slipping away. Not because of a rival, but because of the truth. Elsewhere in the hotel near the theater, Elise stood alone by the window of her simple suite. No assistant, no stylist, no crew. Only the New York wind blowing through the 17th floor window, blending with the sounds of traffic below, like an orchestra without musicians. Professor Samuel stood quietly behind her, holding a simple performance outfit. A plain black dress, no pleats, no embellishments. She touched the fabric, then smiled. It didn't need to sparkle, just the right sound. He looked at her and nodded. "But tonight, the world would listen to you in a different way." She tilted her head, not through her eyes, not through prejudice, but through what they had forgotten, with her heart. And that night, when the lights shone across the stage floor of Crescendo Hall, when the red velvet curtain parted and the giant screen flashed the words, "Opening performance, Elise Harper, USA." The girl who had once been kicked off the stage for being blind, the girl who had once been rejected because she was black, the girl who used to practice in an old studio before dawn, stepping into the light not to get revenge, but to sing the things the world had tried to bury. The dim white rehearsal lights swept across the big stage, not as bright as the Showtime lights, but enough to reveal the scratches on the wooden floor and the dust still clinging to the piano frame. Elise stepped out, neither rushed nor trembling. She didn't need anyone to guide her. All she needed was the hollow echo of her heels on the floor, the breathing of the crew, and the old sweat smell from the conductor's chair. Silent signals that eyes could never see. She found her seat beside the Steinway & Sons D-274, the largest piano considered an international treasure, reserved only for top-tier artists. The piano's glossy surface reflected her hair and the world that had once rejected her. Elise sat down. She set her white cane aside. Then, quietly, she placed her hands on the keys. No sheet music, no metronome, no conductor, no one saying start. Derek Vaughan stood in the wings, arms crossed, eyes cold, as if waiting for her to hit a wrong note so he could step out and cut the lights. But he wasn't ready for what came next, because Elise wasn't playing a famous piece. She wasn't trying to impress with the names Bach or Rachmaninoff. She was composing on the spot. A raw melody, never written before, not measured by sheet music, but by the resilient beat of a heart once thrown into the shadows. The first note, a long G, sounded like a distant call, gentle and fragile, like a child's breath searching for its mother in a crowded market. Then, a series of broken strings, like torn memories patched together with tears. Her left hand touched the bass strings, not just sadness, but a suppressed defiance. Her right hand moved quickly, imperfect but truly painful, as if reaching for a lost loved one. For the first 3 minutes, no one on the crew dared to move. The sound engineer stopped adjusting levels. The lighting techs didn't dare to slowly pan the lights. The director stood frozen behind the podium. Even Royce, who had stood in the oldest concert halls in Europe, who had heard solo performances that outshone the harshest critics, held his breath because he understood and he was afraid. She wasn't playing to convince. She was accusing. The melody Elise played wasn't condemning with words, but every note sounded like the voice of all those who had ever been rejected. It's not that they aren't good enough, but because they don't belong to the world of the right people. The low notes were like the scornful looks they gave her at Eastbrook. The high notes were like the lullabies her mother used to sing, now just echoing in her memory. In the middle part, she rested both hands for exactly 3 beats. The silence made the audience hear the sound of their own swallowing. Then came the climax, a part that completely broke the structure of classical harmony. Her left hand played a 7th chord, while her right hand struck a dissonant note, theoretically incorrect, but like a punch to those who laughed when they saw her sitting with the wrong classical posture. It was no longer music. It was an accusation. And then she finished, not with a harsh note, not with a full chord, but with silence. No one spoke, no one clapped, no signal from the director. Royce was still standing, eyes squinting, but this time he no longer saw a blind girl. He saw a mirror reflecting everything he had lost long ago. Real emotion, real pain, genuine music. She doesn't read music, he muttered under his breath. No full score, no muscle memory. This is the original, pure and simple. This is what I used to play, what I used to live before I started fooling myself. When the rehearsal director stepped forward, his voice rang out, "Elise, is that your performance for the gala tonight?" Elise tilted her head and gave a faint smile. No, that was just a warm-up. And Royce, who once treated every stage like his own, no longer dared to ask to change the order of performances, because he knew this time the one who goes first will be the one who stays the longest. The lights at Crescendo Hall that night weren't blinding. They were soft, like a breath, as if the whole stage knew what was about to happen. No need for bright spotlights, just a feeling in the silence. When the voice announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, opening the Harmony Gala from the United States, Elise Harper," no opening music, no drums to mark the start, no frantic band tuning the tempo, just the sound of a white cane tapping lightly on the wooden stage floor. Each steady step echoed as if time itself slowed down. Elise appeared simply, like a whisper between night and the passing dawn. She wore a plain black dress, no lace trim, no glitter, barefoot to feel the stage as if touching cold childhood memories from the orphanage. Her left hand held the white cane. Her right hand clenched an old wooden flute, the only thing her mother left her, not for its value, but because it was what her mother used to lull Elise to sleep each night after the light had left her eyes forever. She didn't bow, didn't wave. She sat down as if every seat was reserved for the forgotten. No microphone, no conductor, no spotlight circling. She set the flute aside and touched the piano keys, not to play music, but to open the door to the past. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't choose Beethoven. She didn't need Mozart to prove herself. She told a story, a wordless story, made only of notes and silence. The first note sounded like a sigh that couldn't be spoken. Then, a broken minor chord, like an unfinished lullaby from her mother. Her left hand played heavy, slow footsteps, each sound echoing like the lonely steps she took through Eastbrook halls when she was pushed out of every classroom. Her right hand was gentle, like someone softly caressing an old scar. The whole hall sat in silence. Ambassadors, sponsors, famous artist people who once saw the gala as a show of carefully crafted beauty now sat as if they were students learning how to truly listen. And then they cried, not because she was blind, not because she was the first black girl invited here, but because for the first time they felt someone was truly playing for them, not to impress, but to share the pain they had hidden away. Halfway through the song, Elise lifted her hands off the piano and picked up the flute. She didn't stand up. She just tilted her head toward the breeze flowing through the stage door and began to play. Not a familiar tune, but a memory. The sound of the flute was delicate, not sharp. It trembled like the voice of a child left behind. But in that trembling was hope that as long as she could still make a sound, she was still here. The whole theater seemed choked by the simplicity. Royce, sitting backstage where he used to be the center of every holiday season, gripped his chair tight, his fingers white from the pressure, not out of anger, but because he understood he had no words left to argue against what was happening. Not because Elise's music was perfect. It was too real, and the truth didn't need explaining. When Elise played the final notes, not to end but to accept that silence is the most important part of the music, she lowered her flute and lifted her head, not to look, but to feel. No one stood up right away because everyone was quietly reevaluating themselves. What had they just heard? And why did their hearts react that way? Then one person stood, then two, and soon the entire audience followed. They stood not out of ritual, but because they needed to. Not to applaud, but to apologize for all the years of silence before voices like Elise's. Samuel Whitaker stood silently backstage and took off his glasses. He didn't wipe away tears, he just whispered. A girl who was never invited to sit down made the whole world stand up. The next morning, the Human Harmony Gala's newspapers from New York to Tokyo ran headlines like "Musical Earthquake from a Blind Girl." Elise Harper, the new voice of the 21st century, was more than a performance. She was a wake-up call. The official video of the performance was uploaded to Gala's channel and got 5 million views in less than 24 hours. But even with hundreds of thousands of comments flooding in, along with countless interview requests, talk show invites, and million-dollar recording deals offered, Elise didn't show up. She didn't post anything, didn't answer her phone, didn't accept flowers, and didn't leave her hotel room. She just sat silently, her hands gliding over imaginary piano keys on the wooden table, replaying everything from memory. 3 days after the gala, a senior representative from the prestigious Silver Sound Records label that had worked with legends like Herbie Hancock and Renee Fleming personally knocked on her hotel door. He wore a carefully tailored suit, carried a briefcase, a bouquet of white orchids, and a 30-page contract printed in gold ink. Elise opened the door. She didn't nod or invite him in. She just tilted her head and said calmly, "Do you know what an overture means?" The man hesitated. An introduction, I guess?" Elise nodded slightly. "Then what happened yesterday wasn't the whole story. It was just the introduction. And I'm not ready for my name to be in the spotlight yet." No one understood why she refused everything. No explanations, no press conferences, no second appearances. The hotel manager reported that Elise left at 4 a.m. the next day with Professor Samuel Whitaker, carrying only a small suitcase, her white cane, and her old wooden flute. The destination on the receipt was Salzburg, in the mountains. Meanwhile, at the Eastbrook Conservatory boardroom, executives received a request from an anonymous sponsor, an offer to fund $2 million if a training program for disabled artists was established. The only condition was to name the program the Hyanna Bell Initiative. Benjamin Cole, who had rejected Elise's audition and ignored all of Samuel's warnings, sat silently at the table. A New York Times paper was placed in front of him with the headline, "She played for 6 minutes. The world listened for 6 million seconds." And for the first time in his career, he didn't know what chapter he was in or if he'd even been left out of the story. Meanwhile, Elise, in a small wooden house deep in the Salzburg pine forest, wasn't composing, performing, or calling out her name. Every morning, she walked barefoot on the cold grass, sat by the window facing the Alps, and listened to the wind, the insects, the silence. "I'm not retreating," she told Samuel. "I'm just waiting for the right moment to start chapter 1. Somewhere under the western sun, Royce was still performing, still standing in front of packed crowds. But inside, the music he played had lost all meaning for him, because after that moment, he couldn't help but realize one thing. I play to impress the audience. She plays to save people, and she saved me, even though she's never seen my face." In the misty pine forests of Salzburg, while the world was still chasing after the blind girl who created an international theater of audience cries, Elise Harper quietly chose a different way to be present. Not on the stage, but in letters written from places where stage lights never shine. "I will come back to return the sound to where it began, a place where no one needs permission to listen." The Artisan Award ceremony was held at the Royal Hall, an artistic sanctuary that once welcomed legends like Benjamin Britten, Maria Callas, and John Williams, now packed with guests from 94 countries. The whole auditorium felt like a silent choir, waiting for the moment that would redefine the entire idea of glory. The sign hanging behind the stage read, "A night to honor what cannot be taught." Elise appeared right on time, with no entourage, no fancy outfit, just wearing a dark linen cloak, barefoot, holding her white cane and her mother's wooden flute. She walked onto the stage with a familiar stillness, like nightfall over Eastbrook hallways, like a child listening when the whole world isn't paying attention. No opening act, no applause. Elise bowed to the audience, but didn't bow to them. She looked up at the ceiling as if greeting someone far above, someone who taught her that music doesn't need light to be heard. The organizers came forward and handed her the Artisan Award, a handcrafted crystal statue resting on a 100-year-old oak base. Elise touched it for a moment, then gently set it back on the podium. She didn't keep it, didn't accept it, didn't face the cameras. No words, no titles accepted. She didn't need it. The world was the one who needed it. Then she took the old wooden flute out of its case, holding it with both hands, like she was stirring up a memory. No microphone, no mix, no accompaniment, and she began to play. A simple melody, unadorned, following no pattern. It couldn't be defined by scale, measured by BPM, or copied as a MIDI file. It started with a low, fragile note blending with the sound of her breath. Then it turned into a series of notes like a lullaby interrupted halfway through. Anonymous mothers often sang it while wiping tears and rocking their sleeping babies. Next came small, lonely notes like footsteps of those who never dared to step on stage. The entire hall sat still, not the silence of ceremony, but the silence of a soul being touched. No one moved, no one blinked, no one dared to breathe heavily because every movement seemed like it could break something alive in the air. An elder musician on the jury, eyes red, whispered, "She's not playing music, she's restoring it." And when Elise finished, Not with a climactic chord, not with a long, resonant note, but with a silence that stretched like an unspoken goodbye. She bowed her head, placed the flute back in its case, and stepped down from the stage as if she had never been on it. No one applauded. No one stood up. No one said a word, because nothing felt more fitting than silence in that perfect moment, making words unnecessary. The next morning, every newspaper mentioned her, but this time not with phrases like goddess of music or phenomenon of the century. There was only one phrase repeated in every headline: silence had returned. That same day, the Royal Council called an emergency meeting. After 3 hours of discussion, they issued a brief press release. Starting this year, the Award for Artisans will officially be renamed the Elise Bell Award. Not to honor a person, but to remind us of something long forgotten. Music isn't meant to conquer the world. It's how we find our way back to ourselves. Even though the name Elise Harper Honor has gone down in music history, the girl who created it has never appeared on any television channel. No interviews on CNN, no Time magazine covers, no invitations from TED Talks, Oprah, or the BBC. She simply disappeared as if she had never stepped out of the shadows of those grand theaters. But then, little pieces started to show up, not through the cameras, but through stories. In a small riverside town in northern Canada, people whispered about a blind black girl with loose hair and a thick wool coat who once taught a non-verbal autistic boy how to make music with his feet. She scattered rice on the wooden floor. Every time the boy stepped, the rice crackled, and she said, "That's the first beat." Every morning, they'd walk in circles together. When the rice stuck to his heels, when the wood made strange sounds, when silence stretched on, the boy smiled. For the first time in 9 years of therapy, he laughed out loud. In a rural part of Texas, a girl born deaf and labeled unfit to learn music suddenly played her first ballad not through notes, but through vibrations sent by gloves tuned to the melody Elise had shared. She didn't fully understand the song, but she knew why she had to start playing. When a local reporter asked her about it, she simply said, "I didn't learn to play. I play to remember what it feels like to have someone listen, even when I don't make a sound." No videos, no live streams, no confirmations, but the story spread. No proof needed, just faith. Professor Samuel Whitaker, when asked if it was true, just smiled. Do you really need proof if that sound still echoes in your heart? Wherever Elise appeared, there were never VIP seats, security barriers, or flashing cameras. Instead, there was a volunteer class in a small church in Nairobi, where she and orphaned kids wrote melodies from their names. Each child played a note for every letter. A nursing home in Kyoto, where she sat for hours listening to elderly people share the most beautiful sounds of their lives, then turned those sounds into a symphony to send back. A bus stop in Portugal, where she left a handwritten piece of music hidden under a bench for those who didn't know what they were waiting for. Meanwhile, at Eastbrook Conservatory, where Elise had once been rejected without explanation, the wind began to change. Her existence, though never officially recognized by the old board, forced every door there to open. The walls that once hung portraits of white geniuses now held only one empty frame and a plaque that read, "She didn't study here, but she taught us." A new required freshman course called Listening Skills began with 1 hour of silencing no instruments, just the sounds of the space, the person across from you, and yourself. One student asked the new conservatory director if Elise would ever come back to receive an honorary degree. The professor paused, then pointed to the piano in the music room, where the handwritten note she once sent to a freshman student was still stuck. You don't need a degree to be called a musician. You just need the courage to play the first note when everyone's waiting for you to fail. And even though no one could see Elise, they could feel her everywhere. In a special classroom in Mexico City, where blind kids paint rhythms with watercolors, on train platforms in Paris, where street performers start each show with a simple note, like a silent greeting in the hearts of those who once thought music was only for a select few. Elise never sought the spotlight. She looked for quiet places where music didn't need to be proven, just born. No cameras, no applause, just someone ready to start with their own breath. The story began at the place that once turned her away, Eastbrook Conservatory, where Elise Bell was once kept outside the classroom as a silent observer. The halls that once echoed with the footsteps of a blind black girl passing by closed doors. Doors no one would open. Now, that place has a new door. After years of public outcry, sponsors pulling out, and alumni speaking up, the Music Academy's leadership was forced to face the truth. It wasn't that Elise Harper lacked the talent to be accepted, but that they didn't have the courage to recognize talent where they didn't understand it. Under pressure from a petition with over 30,000 signatures from scholars, artists, and educators worldwide, the Eastbrook Board agreed to establish an entirely new teaching wing, not as a form of apology, but as an acknowledgement that music had truly been closed off to them. This project was named Harper House, the unbiased music theory wing. Harper House is unlike any building Eastbrook has ever had. No grand gates, no red carpet, no portraits of famous figures, and no special classrooms. Instead, it has studios with 3D sound that allow the hearing impaired to feel music on their skin. Wide hallways with no steps, equipped with light sensors for the visually impaired. A special music room where students play music using objects, not instruments like cups, stones, ropes, and sounds made from breath. At the center of the building is an open courtyard, roofless, with just a smooth white stone wall and raised lettering. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's where everything waits to be heard. No statue of Elise Harper, no portrait, no plaque, not because she was forgotten, but because her absence became the loudest voice. She once said, "I don't need to stand in the spotlight. I just need someone brave enough to start the melody where I stayed silent." And that keeps her present in every first note of every lesson. At the Bell Wing's opening ceremony, Professor Samuel Whitaker, now retired, with silver hair and a kaniwas, invited to speak. He didn't say much. He just recalled from long ago seeing a blind black girl standing outside the classroom door, listening with her fingertips on the wooden floor. Then he pointed toward the new building and said, "This is the place for kids who were once told music wasn't meant for them, because they don't need permission to feel whole. They are where sound is born." Royce, the artist who once humiliated Elise in front of a crowd, wasn't invited but showed up anyway. He stood at the edge of the ceremony, unnoticed by the crowd. Only Professor Samuel, passing by, gave him a gentle nod. Derek Vaughan said nothing. He just stood there, staring at the empty courtyard engraved with Elise's words. And for the first time in years, he took off his sunglasses and looked long and hard at that space, as if it reflected everything he'd ever thought music was. In the first year since it was founded, Harper House welcomed over 600 students from all over the world, including 128 who had never studied music, 74 who were blind, deaf, or had sensory processing disorders, and 41 who couldn't read or write but knew how to feel. A music teacher at Bell Wing recalled a time when a student who had never touched an instrument played their first melody just by pressing their ear against the wood while a classmate tapped gently. Every morning at Bell Wing, the first music played wasn't a famous classical piece, but a recording with no credited composer, featuring just one line. For those learning to listen to themselves again, the voice of the girl on the recording was unclear, but everyone believed it was a girl's voice. And at the very end, there was only a whisper. "If you hear yourself, then you're no longer invisible." She has no monument, but every heartbeat of those once rejected now beats in the way she lived. Since Harper House opened, no one has seen Elise Bell appear in public. No performance schedule has ever listed her name. No magazine managed to get a new photo. No system could track her movements. But the world kept telling stories about her. In Lisbon, a music teacher happened to walk into a public library and saw a blind girl sitting with another young girl, tapping sounds on an old plastic tube. No instrument, no music books, just the hollow sound of the flute, the echo of hands, and soft laughter filling the afternoon sunlight. The teacher asked if the blind girl was Elise Bell. The girl smiled, but didn't confirm. The next morning, on the teacher's desk, was an untitled, handwritten sheet of music. No signature, just a small line at the bottom. No need for a name. Just listen to the echo. In Peru, in a village near the Amazon rainforest, an 8-year-old blind boy, while browsing Braille books in a mobile library, found a Braille music sheet. The village elder said it wasn't a book they had bought. It just appeared on the shelf like a forgotten breath. The boy played the music on an old wooden instrument, and when he reached the last note, he stopped, turned to his mother, and said, "I don't see that person, but I'm sure they're standing right here." In Ghana, in a small village near the Elmina coast, local drummers developed a new rhythm called Elise's beat. No one taught them. They just said, "One night before the moon rose, we heard a girl who didn't speak, but her footsteps on the ground had a rhythm. We just followed." Today, children in the village still learn the rhythm by listening to the pauses between beats. No place confirms that Elise ever showed up. No one posted a status. No selfies with her. But her presence, like a heartbeat, doesn't need to be seen to be known. At a refugee camp in Syria, someone said they heard a flute at 3 a.m. as people were finishing their evacuation. The flute wasn't clear, but each note seemed to soothe the cracks in everyone's hearts. At a nursing home in Iceland, a housekeeper found a handwritten music sheet under the pillow of a recently deceased old woman. No one knew who left it. The music sheet only said, "For those who have sung but no one listened." At Eastbrook Conservatory, a freshman asked a professor, "What if I never play music perfectly? Does that mean I'm not a musician?" The professor looked up from the music stand, pointed to the space between two notes on the sheet. "Do you hear the sound in this silence? Number. Then you're ready to be a musician. Why? Because the only person who truly understood that once sat outside this classroom in New Delhi, Buenos Aires, Johannesburg, Oslo, New Orleans, people started setting up classes called silent music labs, where students didn't learn how to play music but learned how to listen first. Every class began with an agreement. Sit still for 5 minutes. Close your eyes. Don't play anything. Then the teacher would ask, "What do you hear?" And every answer became a new song. Starting from there, Royce is now old and no longer performs. He lives alone in a small apartment in Riverside, Boston, with just an old piano that's lost its shine, and a Braille music score on a stand he can't read. But every morning, he plays that piece from memory, full of regret. Once, during a workshop, he asked Samuel Whitaker, "If I rewrote all the music in my life just to make a girl I once pushed away feel accepted, is it too late?" Samuel simply replied, "It's never too late if you write about what you've lost." Elise Bell never disappeared. She blended into the rhythm of the world, in the sounds of poor kids playing music with tin cans, in sizes turning into melodies, in the first notes of people who never believed they deserved to hold an instrument. One winter day in a remote mountain village in Bhutan, an instrumental piece was found hanging on the door of a small temple. No composer's name, just a simple line. "If you hear something in the silence, it means I was once here." That night, Elise Harper didn't just play music. She awakened the conscience in all of us. No need for retaliation, no need for glory, just a guitar and the belief that No matter who you are, you deserve to be heard. On the channel, Mystic Life Stories for American Audience. We believe that quiet kindness can change a noisy world. If something touched you in this story, please share it, because maybe you're the next person to inspire.